Welcome back to Torsos of Desire, written and read by me, Nicole Beckley. This is episode 3, where I'll be reading pages 44 through 66. A quick recap of what happened previously. Our narrator got a new coworker, an intern named Sophie. She oversaw her first romance novel cover photo shoot, and she went on a date to an escape room with Paul, the hot guy from the Apple store, who it turns out has some other secret freelance job that he's being really cagey about. The narrator also met Diego Rancho, a cover model who asked for her phone number, which she gave him, even though she's continuing to go out with Paul, which is where we've left off. The date, part 2. I wanted to make sure my date with Paul was magical and perfect, so I had to first consult the stars. I went to the planetarium. They had a special movie about black holes. After that, I read my horoscope. It said that exciting things were developing, and that Mercury was in my 5th house of creativity. How many houses did my creativity need? The stars seemed to be saying that we should go to one of those paint-your-own pottery places, but I swore never to go back to one of those after I got blacklisted for accidentally tripping on a ceramic cookie jar and smashing all the clay pieces of an entire bachelorette party. They really shouldn't encourage so much drinking at those places. The best thing to do was probably to take a stroll through Central Park. Most people didn't know, but it was originally going to be called Bieber Park, but the developers changed it because Justin Bieber hadn't been born yet. Timing is everything. I called Paul and told him to meet me at Columbus Circle and to bring a moped with a sidecar. I don't have a moped with a sidecar, he said. It's fine, I told him. Just bring the moped then. I waited at Columbus Circle in a pair of skin-tight black jeans and a silky top the color of a traffic cone. I wanted to make sure he'd be able to see me. I heard an engine revving and roaring, and suddenly Paul rode up on a motorcycle. It wasn't the moped I asked for, but was somehow hotter. He took his bright white helmet off, and it was like his hair swished in the breeze in slow motion. His face was shiny and newly shaved, and he had a perfect arrow of sweat down his white t-shirt, pointing directly at his crotch. Men will do anything to get you to look there. For a moment, I just wanted to stand there and take him in. The dark jeans, the motorcycle boots, the cut forearms. I couldn't shake the feeling of familiarity, like somehow I'd seen this guy before I'd ever met him. Maybe it was in a past life. That's where I'd met most people who looked familiar. I wondered what Paul looked like as a child. He was probably shorter. "So what did you have in mind?" he said. I could think of a few things, most of which were definitely illegal. "Ever driven one?" he asked, nodding toward the motorcycle. "Oh yeah, all the time," I lied. "You want to lead the way then?" And he motioned for me to sit on the seat in front of him so that he'd straddle me from behind. I figured, what the heck, there's a first time for everything. Floating on air. My night with Paul was everything I'd hoped it would be. Fun, sexy, dangerous, scary, grotesque, thrilling. It was like a good Halloween party where you went dressed as a shipwrecked pirate and drank rum out of an old boot. Is it too early to be thinking about my next Halloween costume? As soon as Paul realized I shouldn't be driving a motorcycle, we decided to walk through the park instead. If you've never tested the range of human sounds your potential lover might make, a good way to do it is by almost wrecking their Ducati. Inside the park, Paul told me all about his life. His younger sister Peg, the nurse, his childhood in California, and his brief pro baseball career that ended due to a year-long rut where he couldn't hit a single pitch. "I thought I'd been cursed," Paul said, so I wanted to get as far away from baseball as possible and ended up at the Apple store. I understood. I thought I'd been cursed once. It was when this old Sicilian woman at a cheese shop yelled, "I put a curse on you," when I accidentally stepped in front of her in line. Don't get between old Sicilian women and their pecorino. I still get nervous every time I use a cheese grater. We stopped and got frozen fudge pops from a street vendor. We skipped some rocks across Turtle Pond. Paul even got some pigeons to stay long enough to let us pet them. I knew he had an undeniable animal magnetism. "What about you?" he said. "What's your story?" I told him it was probably very similar to something out of Roman mythology. He raised his eyebrows. "What, were you raised by wolves?" "Wolves of Wall Street, maybe. So pretty much the same thing." I told him that I currently had a very important job in media. "Also, don't laugh," I said, "but I've been anointed by the karaoke gods." That's how you get someone to agree to sing Because the Night at a Lower East Side dive while you play air saxophone behind them. It was spectacular. Everybody in the bar bought us tequila shots, and Paul tried to decline, but I told him it was a local custom. And what did he want them to think we were? Tourists? When Paul was 6 or 7 shots in, I thought, now's the time to find out what his freelance job is. But either Paul can hold his liquor or he really didn't want to tell me because he kept miming pulling a zipper across his lips. I was almost drunk enough not to be annoyed by mime. Just give me a little hint, I pleaded. I just want to... I was interrupted by Paul's soft, dreamy lips on mine. Damn, he'd figured out exactly the right way to change the subject. We kissed and he put me in an Uber like a gentleman. He didn't even try to help me by putting his hand on my ass. Who was this guy? The boss. Carrie was in drill sergeant mode at work. She kept barking orders to the various designers, and I almost expected them to salute each time she spoke. She seemed stressed, strained, sieved. Something was going on. She was making Sophie shuttle papers between the design department and the legal department, and Sophie kept muttering that she was better than this. No, you're not, Sophie. I thought about slipping a little Bailey's into Carrie's coffee to take the edge off, but then just decided to switch her non-fat creamer for half and half. That would make her feel better, and she wouldn't even know why. It turned out that Carrie was really cracking the whip because sometime in the next few weeks we were going to be getting a visit from the author of the Buck Wild novels, C.J. Carlson. Carrie wanted to make sure that we'd be well ahead of the production schedule before she arrived. She said that CJ was very particular and everything had to be perfect, especially because CJ was in fierce competition with the other romance writers. According to the PR girls, CJ Carlson was kind of an elusive figure who liked to remain shrouded in mystery, like Harper Lee or Lauryn Hill. I heard she's super glamorous and always jet-setting around by private plane, PR girl number 1 said. I heard she gets her inspiration from her real-life lovers, PR girl number 2 said. I heard she has a timeshare at one of the Sandals resorts, I said. That wasn't true, but have you ever met someone who did? Sophie was staying pretty quiet, so I figured I should try to make some conversation with her. So, comparative literature. How's the money in that? I honestly wanted to know. Sophie just rolled her eyes. Maybe instead she should major in eye-rolling. My phone dinged then with a text from Diego. Did I want to see his band? I was still riding high from my date with Paul, but I didn't want to put all my eggs in one basket, especially when I still didn't know everything about him. And Diego was exceptionally hot. Sure, I texted back with 6 exclamation points. I never know how many exclamation points is too many. Total racket. Have you ever heard a chainsaw cutting through a piece of metal while somebody plays trombone? Or a chain link fence incessantly rattled while a super long guitar solo wails? That was pretty much the sound of Diego's ska, punk, metal fusion band, the Soggy Nightmares. There were 18 people in the band, and they each seemed to be playing a different song. They didn't really have a sound, but they had a lot of sounds. They were playing in the back room of the speakeasy above an illegal sports bar. Every time the strobe lights flashed, 1 or 2 of the guitarists would fall off the stage. I asked the bartender for as many napkins as he could give me and then stuffed them in my ears. It wasn't that I didn't like the band, it's just that I definitely hated it. How do you tell somebody that their art is terrible and they should give up? Luckily, they only played 3 songs, and then the next band, the Latin Principes, took over. I never wanted to hear accordion more in my life. Diego asked me what I thought, and I told him they all must have a lot of fun together. Actually, we all kind of hate each other, he said. It shows, I said. He ordered a couple of beers, and I drank about half of mine in one gulp. I think I need to get out and do a solo project, Diego said. Yeah, people love solo bassists, I said. I guess I still wanted to seem encouraging. After all, he was still a beautiful heap of man. Then Diego went on and on for the next 3 hours about how he got into music and what the best fusion bands were and how he'd almost met Flea a few times when he snuck backstage at a Red Hot Chili Peppers show. Before I knew it, it was 1:30 a.m. and I was exhausted. So, my place? Diego said. He ran his hand through his long hair and looked down to make sure that his shirt was unbuttoned enough that you could see all his necklaces. I told him I had to get home to take care of my sick border collie. Do I have a border collie? No, but that doesn't mean they couldn't be sick. dim sum. Part of me couldn't believe that I'd turned down somebody as smokin' as Diego, but another part of me had been bored out of my mind. And another part was thinking about how coconut water seems like a big scam. After I got home, Diego texted me 2 smiley faces, a guitar, and a fire emoji, and the words, "Good night," in all caps. I texted him the ghost with its tongue out, because who knows what that means. Just when I decided to forget all about Diego, my landlord called. They sounded really frantic and panicky and saying stuff about building inspectors and elevators, and I couldn't really tell. And also I was getting a call from Paul, so I told them I'd talk to them later. Why is it that the one time somebody calls you is exactly when somebody else will try to call you? Paul said he'd been thinking about me, and would I want to get dim sum at Tim Ho Wan? Konnichiwa, I yelled. That means yes in Chinese. After Diego, Paul was like more than a breath of fresh air. He was like a full-on gust. Not only did he meet me at the Union Square subway station, he pulled my seat out for me and opened any doors that were in my way. This guy was raised with some serious manners. He didn't even burp at the table or anything. Paul said he loved eating dim sum because it was very popular where he grew up. China? I said. Cupertino. Cupertino? Wait, like where the headquarters of Apple is? Was this part of his freelance secret? Was he related to Steve Jobs? Or was he designing some new secret Apple product? I had to find out, but how? Clearly, the first step was going to involve getting a good look at Paul's apartment. I needed to get in there and do some inspecting. I told Paul I wanted to come over for a nightcap, just to talk, so he wouldn't think I was up to anything. That would be nice, he said, and then took my hand so we could walk hand in hand down the street. It was so sweet I almost regretted being devious. Almost. Paul's apartment. Turns out sometimes pro baseball players can make some serious coin. At least if Paul's apartment was any indication. He had huge windows overlooking a courtyard of beautiful plants, beige pine wood floors throughout the living and dining rooms, stainless steel thermador appliances, royal blue pendant lamps, tastefully exposed white brick walls. It was so sleek and sexy, I just wanted to peel my dress off right there and make love to it. I almost completely forgot I was supposed to be looking for clues. "Make yourself comfortable," Paul said. I took off my heels and laid down in the big plush sheepskin rug. This must be what lying on a cloud felt like. I couldn't wait to rummage through Paul's medicine cabinet and his refrigerator. I wonder if he had any fine cheeses. "Can I get you something to drink?" "How about a Long Island Arnold Temple?" I started to say, but then remembered how that had ended the last time. "Whatever you're having is great," I said. While he was in the kitchen, I looked all around. Where would I find clues? And what exactly was I looking for? Apple products? He just had the normal stuff everybody has. A MacBook, a MacBook Air, a HomePod, an iPad Mini, AirPods, and an Apple Watch. I scanned his bookshelf, but it was mostly books about baseball. Moneyball, The Art of Fielding, The Catcher in the Rye. Maybe his freelance job was a Little League coach. But then, wouldn't he just say that? Or maybe he thought it was too early in our relationship to talk about children. Paul came back with 2 whiskeys on the rocks. I quickly pretended not to be looking at his bookshelf and instead stared at him. He looked incredible. His rippling muscles, his blinding smile. He was almost too perfect. Then I remembered. "Didn't you say that you have a cat?" He said he did, but right now the cat was spending time with its mom. "You left your cat alone with another cat?" I asked. "No, with Marissa, my ex." "Ex?" Well, this was the first I was hearing about this. He got a slightly far-off look in his eyes when he said her name. What was he trying to do, make me jealous? 'Cause it was working. "Don't you have any exes?" he asked. "Me?" "No," I said. He laughed a little, the way people do when they're passing gas. It was probably the whiskey. "You're funny," he said. I told him I was going to need to know more about this Marissa person, if that was her real name. He told me she was a sports reporter and they'd been together for 3 years, but right before he was about to propose, she ran off to Brazil, Belgium, and Belarus to discover who she was and write an Eat, Pray, Love style memoir. "Hey, at least it's an original plan," I said. Paul started to look a little sad, and there's nothing worse than a sad, hot person, so I did what anyone would do. I rolled him over and scratched his belly, 'cause you know what they say, The way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Paul's apartment, part 2. Things escalated from there. Paul's apartment, part 3. Okay, I'll tell you about it, you creep. Paul took me in his arms and held me close to his rock-hard chest. I ran my fingers over his bulging bicep, tracing the veins. Why are ripped guys so veiny? I could feel him flex, and I thought his poor shirt was really working overtime to contain him, so I started undoing the buttons. I mean, give that shirt a break. I ran my hands over his upper abs and his middle abs and his lower abs. Wow, this guy's torso is really all abs. And yet I'd seen him eat whatever he wanted without saying something annoying like, "This is my cheat day." He was almost a god among men. He rolled me on top of him and I instantly started to shiver. I realized now I was directly under the air conditioning vent. Paul noticed I had goosebumps and whispered that maybe he should light some candles and turn the lights off. I assume he wanted it dark so he wouldn't have to see the goosebumps. They are pretty unsightly. In total darkness, Paul struck a match, and right when the little bursts of flame sparked near his naked chest, I got chills. The AC in Paul's place was out of control. The candles smelled really good and manly, just like fresh cement. It's difficult to find a candle with a good, hard scent. Paul took his jeans off, folded them, and placed them neatly on the couch. Wow, this guy was really tidy. He wrapped his arms around me, then his legs. Then I felt something. It was small at first, but then it grew, and suddenly I was really getting wet. The sprinkler system had come on. It dripped a little and now was on full blast, drowning the candle flames. It was all dark and we were totally drenched and cold, so we just had sex in the shower. Paul's apartment, part 4. In the text it says, just a full page that says sex a bunch of times in different fonts. But since this is audio, maybe something more like... Yeah, that's about right. The morning after. Sleeping with someone new is always a real roller coaster, especially if you're on a roller coaster, what some people won't do to feel a little motion sickness. Paul had been incredible. I kept replaying it in my mind. He had moves I'd never seen before, and some I'd only seen in adult films like Jerry Maguire or A Fish Called Wanda. When I woke up, Paul was snoozing like a little piglet, by which I mean he was doing this kind of oink snoring thing. I spotted a package of Breathe Right nasal strips on his nightstand. Aha! I knew he couldn't be perfect. I checked my phone and I had 8 voicemails from my landlord. The most they'd ever left me before was 7, and that was when I went to Honolulu for 2 months without paying my rent. Something was up. I wasn't going to listen to the messages, because who does that? But I knew I should probably get back to my apartment. I kissed Paul on the cheek and left my panties under his pillow so he'd find them later and have to return them. It's rude not to return panties that aren't yours. When I arrived at my apartment building, it was total chaos. There was yellow caution tape all around the elevators and the staircase and the fire escape. What's going on? I asked one of my neighbors. Who are you? They said. I really don't know my neighbors at all. Outside, there was an older gentleman with a clipboard and a tie and a pair of tortoise-shell reading glasses, so I figured he had to know something. Buildings being condemned, he said. What? I yelled. Condemned, he said really slowly. It means, I know what it means, I said. This wasn't my first condemned apartment. Bulldozing starts tomorrow, maybe the next day, he said. Not again. Karen's house. I couldn't believe I was being kicked out of my apartment, and not even for something I did. Where was I going to go? It was impossible to find a new place in Manhattan with 0 notice, especially one with a good washer-dryer situation. I couldn't ask anyone from work, that would seem pathetic. I mentally scrolled through my list of friends and enemies and finally called Karen and asked her to take me in, just for a while, a year or 2, tops. When I got to Karen, she said I could put my stuff in her guest bedroom. She called it that, but when did she ever have guests? I'd forgotten how crummy Karen's place was, especially compared to Paul's. She didn't even have any pendant lamps. It was all just basic wood floors and boring bookshelves and windows that overlooked an alleyway. All her decor was beige or paintings she did herself and adult art classes that she thought were good. I asked her if she regularly kept Perrier on tap like I did in my apartment, and she just shook her head and sort of muttered to herself. I keep telling Karen she has to stop muttering. Guys don't like a mutterer. Doesn't she know that? I told Karen I was going to need to take a nap for a while because it had already been a long day. Not only with the whole apartment thing, but also I'd been up all night having out-of-this-world sex. Karen said 1 p.m. wasn't a good time to be taking naps because it would throw off my circadian rhythm. But I told her I'd learned salsa and bachata from the best instructor in Colombia, and I doubted a power nap would make me forget everything. Karen just muttered and closed the door. A new day. The first night at Karen's was not comfortable. Turns out her place makes a bunch of creaky noises at night, like a ghost or a ghost with bad arthritis. Not to mention it's right next to a fire station. And she has a neighbor who wakes up by singing opera at the top of her lungs. Must be some dumb opera singer or something. I was all bent out of shape by the time I got to the office. It felt like my knees and arms were at right angles, but my hips and neck were perfectly straight. Even Sophie seemed to notice that something wasn't right, though she didn't say anything. I hadn't heard from Paul at all the previous day, and I wondered if he'd even found the panties. There was a good chance he was still sleeping off our night together. Or more likely, using the adrenaline rush of our passion to do 100 pull-ups. Seriously, he was so built. Now that most of the Buck Wild photo shoots were over, Carrie said we'd have to start prepping things for some author meetings. Once a quarter, they'd bring in new authors to discuss their books, and the designers would come up with graphic ideas. I talked to a few of the designers, and their ideas were graphic. Very graphic. While Sophie worked on compiling all the new book synopses, I got to the important task of ranking all the New York Wine and Food Festival participating chefs by hotness. It's something that not everybody thinks about. At some point, though, I realized I might need to think about how to get all my stuff out of my apartment before it got bulldozed. My phone dinged with a text from Diego. It was a peach, 2 fireballs, and a glass of whiskey. My guess was that he was asking if I wanted to get a drink after work. Actually, I texted, "How strong are you?" The key to asking anyone to help you to move is to frame it as a feat of strength. Turned out, Diego was stronger than I thought he was, and almost as strong as he thought he was. I've never seen someone lavish more kisses on their own muscles, but I guess you have to love yourself first, like Oprah says. I still didn't think I wanted to date him, but if he could get everything I owned into the back of a trailer, who cared? On one hand, it meant listening to him ramble on about how blood sugar sex magic changed his life, but on the other, he did it voluntarily shirtless. Who was I to complain? "Oh yeah, I took your advice," he said, as he unloaded my suitcases. "To throw all your band members' instruments into the East River?" I asked, hopeful. "To go solo. I'm playing later tonight. You have to come." This is how people trap you, by saying, "you have to." I tried to fake a yawn, telling him I had to see if my toaster would work in Karen's bathtub, but he insisted that making toast in the bathtub was impractical. Hey, let me be the judge. At 10 p.m., Diego was about to play in the tiled basement of an old sushi bar. It was just a regular bar, but all the drinks were named after sushi rolls. The acoustics were terrible, but the music was also terrible. Turns out that without his band, it was obvious that Diego played the bass like he was plucking out arm hairs. The only saving grace was that it was very, very loud. "I'm gonna dedicate this one to this angel right here," he said, and pointed at me. Besides the bartender, there was only one other guy in the bar who looked at me with the intention of someone who was about to commit a murder. I couldn't blame him. I wasn't ready to get murdered. I mean, I just moved. So I snuck out the bar's back door and checked my phone. I sent Paul a text earlier, but I still hadn't heard from him. What could he be up to? It's not like he had another job, except the one he wouldn't tell me about. The missing person. A day or two went by and still no word from Paul. I wondered if he'd become a missing person. I'd watched a documentary once about a guy who everyone thought went missing right before his wedding, but then it turned out he'd been on the hotel roof the whole time, and his friends were too drugged up to realize it. It was actually a pretty hilarious film, though the sequels were not as good. What could have happened to Paul? Maybe he was just so overcome by our sweet lovemaking that he wanted to savor the moment as long as possible. Or maybe he'd accidentally dropped his phone down the garbage disposal, or been eaten by bears, or worse, cannibals. Though fine, I guess you never really hear about cannibals in Soho. I tried to talk to Karen about it, but she just kept saying things like, you can't leave wet laundry on the couch, and why is there a toaster by the toilet? It's like she didn't even care Paul was missing. I was just thinking about wandering by the Apple store on my lunch break under the false pretense of taking a walk when my phone buzzed. Hurrah! It was Paul, and he hadn't encountered any cannibals. Apparently he'd left me a voicemail, though seriously, who even checks those? He had to go to a remote village in Alaska where he didn't have any phone service. Of course, I knew there had to be a logical explanation. You left in such a hurry the other morning, he said. If you'd stuck around a little longer, I would have told you I had to go to Alaska for work. At the Apple store? I asked. No, for my freelance job. Freelance job? Now I wanted to know more than ever. What was it? Your freelance job as a dog sled racer? A fur jacket designer? Paul laughed and said he'd tell me soon enough, though clearly it wouldn't be soon enough because I wanted to know now. Actually, I'm at the airport, he said. In New York? Juneau, he said. Yeah, I know. No, Juneau. Did I know? This went on for a few more minutes until Paul hung up. He'll be back soon. This has been Section 3 of Torsos of Desire, read by the author, Nicole Beckley, and produced by Nicole Beckley. The music is from Blue Dot Sessions. Tune into the next episode to find out what happens next.